So yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, Oliver, I know you had reached out initially and was interested in doing something. But I guess just to start off the recording here, maybe just talk about like what it is that you guys do and what value you bring to the table and what we're going to try and do here today.
Yeah, so in terms of who we are, so my name's Oliver, this is John, and we are co-owners of Mastering the Mind Consultancy. That's a sports psychology consultancy that we founded a couple of years ago now. We work in both esports and traditional sports. So done a lot of work in academy football, and then in terms of like esports, a lot of my work's been in Overwatch. John's done a lot of work as well, but also we've worked across different game titles as well. So like CS:GO, COD. We're actually going to a COD LAN this weekend.
Wow, nice.
So that should be good in the UK. Yeah, and that's another thing. We're based in the UK. John's
Nice.
based in Belgium. And yeah, so today we're going to look at maybe if you could share the presentation, John.
Yeah. There we go.
Excellent. Let me get that pulled up then really quick.
Yeah, let me know when you got it pulled up.
Got it.
Sweet. So yeah, today we're going to take you through a bit of a taster psychology session of like
Sure.
what it is coping with tilt. But we're going to be using an acceptance commitment therapy lens, which is also known as ACT. So ACT is one of many approaches sport and exercise psychologists use when working with esports players. So today you're going to experience it.
Lovely.
So let's see how you get on. So yeah, for the purpose of this exercise, we actually ask you to play role play an Overwatch tank player.
Sure.
So in terms of like what we gave you, I'll give like the listeners a bit of an insight into what that was. So during an important practice for the World Cup qualifiers for Team US, you begin to tilt after making a series of mistakes. You decided to tackle the issue and work with a sports psychologist to better manage your emotions to help lead your team to victory in future competitions. So from now on, we'd like you to get into character Spilo, and we'll begin the session from the next slide.
Okay, sure. Sounds good.
So yeah. All right. So thanks for coming to this session. It's lovely to meet you. From what we discussed in DMs, I just want to clarify, you're a tank in Overwatch, experiencing some tilt issues when you make mistakes, and that's either by mistakes from your teammates or yourself. Firstly, I just want to say it's great that you took the initiative to reach out to a sports psychologist, and this is definitely something we can support you with. We're going to be exploring this tilt issue with a type of training in psychology called acceptance commitment training, and there's going to be two segments to today's session. So the first segment will be taken by John, where he's going to take you through acceptance. And then I'm going to take you through diffusion in the second part. Both are different perspectives to looking at tilt and how we can alter our thoughts and feelings in the moment to have better control when experiencing those scenarios that make you tilt. So this will mainly be education. And then in future sessions, we would look to explore this in a bit more of an interpersonal way. But for the purpose of the video, this will be a great start, and you'll be able to take some realizations from it, and hopefully a bit of education as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, Philo, when we're rambling on, just feel free to stop us and ask anything you want.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So before we sort of start, we do want to specify that ACT is one of many approaches that exist in psychology. So if you feel that at any stage, ACT isn't really for you, we can definitely explore other approaches in the future. So, working with a sports psychologist is really like a trial and error process. So it's really important to specify that. But ACT is an approach that's shown to be quite successful across different, esports players and the athletes. And that's why I wanted to sort of share it with you today with Oliver. So yeah. So as a little background first, so as you know, as a tank player, Overwatch tank player, you may experience a lot of negative thoughts or emotions, maybe stemming from things like poor map control or having inadequate support from your teammates. And when we begin to get entangled with our thoughts and emotions, we sort of get to, feel we're getting pushed around by them, and that can be really detrimental to our performance, right? So that's just how the mind works. It's just how our brain was designed, sort of by evolution, where as humans, we analyze and are aware of potential threats in the near future, and we sort of respond to them with a fight or flight response. So, for example, if a player sort of believes that his desire to win a tournament or a round or a map is being threatened, they may experience some negative thoughts or emotions, such as anxiety, frustration, sadness, etc. And when these negative thoughts sort of start to creep in, our initial response and maybe reflex is to want to suppress them and avoid them as much as possible, because as humans, we really try to seek comfort and avoid unpleasant situations and experiences. And this is a process that's actually called experiential avoidance. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing this. It's sort of automatic. It's not like we all of a sudden say, oh, I don't want to feel this feeling, right? It's something that we naturally do instinctively. The only problem with this is that pain and discomfort is naturally part of our lives, and the more we try to push away from our unhelpful feelings and thoughts and try to avoid them, the bigger these may grow until that pain turns into suffering. So another example that I really like to use is, I'm really guilty of this, of course, I do this all the time, but let's say you've cooked a big meal and it's important for you to wash the dishes, but and sort of put everything away. But in that evening, for example, you might be like, I can't be bothered right now. I'm too tired. So you put it off for the next day or even the following day. So you leave all the dishes in the kitchen sink, and when you come back to the next day, the food gets kind of sticky and hard on the plates, on the pots, and the pans, and it takes much more effort to clean it, right?
Right.
And that pain and discomfort, it doesn't go away. It's just waiting until that little break is over. So, we keep doing these little things to try and escape in the short term, but in the long term, it keeps us, far away from how we want to live our lives. So acceptance and commitment training is sort of the step to that. It's about learning how we come into contact with these difficult feelings and how we sort of relate to them, rather than wanting to suppress and get rid of them. It's really the idea that thoughts and feelings aren't the problem. They're not the issue. They're not the problem. It's really how we relate to them. So yeah, that's a little spiel. I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions right now.
No, not right now.
No? Okay, cool. So the first, I guess, one of the concepts of acceptance and commitment therapy or training is the idea of acceptance. So acceptance is really the idea of being willing to have what's already there. It's really taking what is offered, and it's really trying to accept these unhelpful internal thoughts and feelings that we might be experiencing, rather than trying to fight them. So another word for acceptance is willingness. So being willing to do something isn't a passive process. It's more about embracing and being willing to let these internal thoughts and feelings sit there with us rather than trying to fight them. So it's really not a passive process of being willing. It's really the idea of, I'm willing to live my life with this unhelpful thought or feeling that might be occurring. And yeah, it's really learning to try and embrace these internal experiences. That's really what acceptance is. So acceptance isn't sort of, sucking it all up and, getting over it, as we might always hear in, high performance, whether it's in sport or in esport. It's not resigning yourself to the situation. It's really you taking the necessary steps to see the situation differently. And it's not tolerating and putting up with pain. It's having more of an open stance and allowing these ups and downs that might happen in your career, for example. And acceptance is, you taking an active and vital and, sort of embrace the moment, taking that stance. And it's being non-judgmental towards yourself, and it's being curious and gentle towards yourself as well. So that's really what acceptance is. It's not, like I said, resigning yourself, tolerating with pain, you're being willing to sit with unhelpful thoughts and feelings, for example. Oh, sorry. So, Spider, we have a little task for you.
All right.
To sort of illustrate this idea of acceptance. So if you have like a piece of paper near you, I would love for you to write down an emotion that you feel that you struggle with. For example, so you obviously came to us with tilt. That might be one, for example. It could be fear, it could be sadness, it could be anxiety. And I would,
Right.
so if you could write it down on a piece of paper. So
I've
I'm going to do it
got
too
it.
with you. Yeah, you
Got it. Yeah.
Mine is anxiety, so I'm going to write it down as well on a piece of paper.
Mine is fear of losing on stage. Honestly, it's been really bothering me.
Okay, fantastic. So what I would like you to do is to begin crunching that piece of paper. So as you can see, here mine's anxiety. I want you to sort of crunch it. Sorry
Sure.
for the noise in the mic. I really want your objective to be when you're crunching is to try and get this ball of paper like a size of a nickel. That's your objective right now. So really, it has to be tiny. The smaller the better for this exercise. How are you getting on?
Doing pretty good. I started with a sticky note, so I'm aiming for something even smaller than a nickel.
That's cheating. You need a big paper. Okay.
I'll aim for a dime size.
Okay, dime size. How are you getting on?
Good. It's getting smaller.
Getting smaller? Okay.
But I think we've kind of hit the wall here. We're a little smaller than a dime, but that's about as far as I can get, I think.
Okay. And the more you sort of crunch up this piece of paper, what are some maybe things that you're observing or like feeling maybe in your fingers? Yeah.
I mean, it's just tension, you know? It's getting tighter and tighter. It takes more effort to finish the job. I also kind of honestly forget about what I was thinking. Like, I forget about what it was crunched up, and now I'm just focused on the task of actually crunching, honestly.
Yeah, lovely. Really nice. What are some other things that you notice whilst you do this task? I'm still doing it, by the way.
It's kind of cathartic, you know,
Mhm.
in a way. I don't know.
Yeah.
Makes me feel like it can take out the emotion somewhere.
Yeah. Lovely. If you had to think of maybe, so you mentioned something really interesting there, it's sort of aligned with the costs of doing this exercise. If you had to think of some potential costs of trying to crunch up this paper, what those might be, for example?
It's physically effort, the task of like actually having to write it down and crunch it up is kind of annoying to go through those steps, you know. It definitely means I have to think about like I have to be. I mean, it's kind of awkward to kind of like say, you know, that I'm scared to step on stage. I mean, I feel like everyone kind of knows it, but like having to like say it is kind of makes me uncomfortable, honestly.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask you this: how do you think this exercise relates to this idea of feeling nervous of stepping on stage, for example, and dealing with those thoughts? How do you think this relates?
I don't know. I mean, I guess actually saying it out loud is kind of me just accepting the fact that I do feel that way. Like I kind of I don't know. I feel like for me, it's like if I'm going to be a competitor, I just like I shouldn't be scared of like doing these things, but I don't know. Sometimes I don't want to admit the fact that I'm kind of there's like this tension, this fear of doing it because I feel like if I'm like going to be a professional player, I shouldn't feel like that. But I guess just admitting it, I don't know. Maybe it's just something I need to practice.
Yeah. How in terms of energy, how much does that consume? So you mentioned I should be doing this, I should be thinking like that, I shouldn't be nervous going on stage. How consuming in terms of your energy is that towards maybe your performance, you think?
It's not so bad until like it's like a day or two before. Then I feel like it's like really hard to even like sleep because I'm like always thinking about it. It's like in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking like, I can even like envision myself doing a good job on stage, but it's everything is like revolving around that stage, and everybody watching, and like it feels like it's just overwhelming pressure. And then I'm aware that there's like a lot of pressure on me, and I'm like trying to relax, and then the more I try to like make myself relax, the more I feel like I'm pressured. It's just like this cycle.
Yeah. What do you think the alternative might be in terms of how you relate to those feelings and those nerves before? What do you think could be another way to approach these anxieties, do you think?
I know there was like I saw this Michael Jordan documentary, and he was talking about how like it was almost like an excitement or a desire to be put on a stage, like because it was an opportunity to like perform, and I do like performing, but sometimes it feels like maybe I could be taking. I need to try to learn how to kind of take the negative aspects of the fear and use it as more as like, hey, this is an opportunity to like show off, for like have a better term. But I'm not even sure if that's like a healthy way of looking at it either.
Yeah, I think it's lovely. How about potentially letting these unhelpful thoughts and feelings just sit next to you? So rather than crunching and trying to make sense of them and trying to get rid of them, because naturally that's what we try to do. How about just letting it sit next to you, and accepting that these are internal experiences that you might have, but you're willing to let these sit next to you. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess because I can't I can't get rid of them. I've tried crunching them up, many times. We've had a couple of other lands before, like smaller lands, but it was always the same thing. It's like at practice, I'm not like really. I'm still like I guess I'm like a little bit less nervous, but like it feels like the more it's always like a bigger stage, and so the same old feelings keep coming up, and so like I don't know. I've never been able to like fully like process them by like pushing them away or like not thinking about them. So I don't know. I mean, it's not my way has not worked. So
Yeah. So I think the idea behind this little analogy and this little exercise is that yes, it is hard to cope with the struggle, but maybe let's think about the potential costs of wanting to suppress these feelings and these feelings of anxiety, maybe before going on stage. And you mentioned there at the start of the exercise that you notice yourself actually forgetting what we were talking about because you're so focused on trying to crunch this ball, i.e.,
yeah,
trying to get
yeah,
rid of these thoughts, that you're not able to connect with the present moment. But that's really important as an esports player and as a tank player especially. You need to be maybe potentially thinking about team tactics before a game, etc., etc., and for your mind to be a bit clearer, right? So
yeah.
that's the idea of this little analogy is rather than trying to suppress you know, get rid of these and crunch the ball, why not maybe what an alternative might be just to accept and let them sit there. And this is something, of course, it sounds really easy to do, but acceptance is a skill, and it's something that can be learned.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the sort of idea. How
I re-
does that sound? Yeah,
I,
or no?
Also, a really good analogy for this that I love, that I just wanted to add in before we move on from this is, imagine that you was in a swimming pool, right? And we're talking about, your thoughts and feelings, and you've got like a inflatable ball, right?
Right.
And imagine you're really trying to suppress, your thoughts about your fear of stepping on stage, yeah? And you're trying to push the ball down, right? Imagine you're trying to
Right.
push your thoughts down. But what happens with inflatable balls?
Yeah. They
They
come right
just want
back.
they just want to come back up. So what about instead of like trying to push them down because we all know they're just going to come flying back up, instead, what would happen if you just let the ball just float next to you?
Right. Right.
So suddenly you're not stressed about trying to push these emotions down, and more so you can actually focus on the task at hand.
So
You're
if
not
it's so,
fighting.
if it's so unintuitive and like it's so unhelpful, then why is it like feels like it's everybody's first response to push the ball down?
Yeah,
Why is that?
yeah.
Is it just like
It's just
psychological
how,
thing?
yeah, it's just how we're wired in terms of evolution. We seek comfort. We don't like uncomfortable situations, and we want to try and resolve these things and unhelpful thoughts and feelings rather than how we relate to it differently, which is potentially acceptance. It's sort of not our natural instinct to be able to accept, and that's why I said acceptance is something that you can learn and get
Mm,
better at. But yeah, that's just like an alternative way to deal with these potential anxieties that you might be experiencing before stepping on stages, rather than trying to get rid of them and sort of be harsh on yourself, judgmental towards yourself on why am I feeling this? I shouldn't be feeling this. I've done this plenty of times, etc. Rather than focusing your mind on that, which is what we naturally do, maybe why just not let them sit there next to you?
sure.
Accept that they're here. So it allows you to connect with the present moment. It allows you to connect with your teammates and what's important in that moment, and that's to perform. So
Sure.
yeah,
Okay.
all right. So that's a uh little task for acceptance, and I'll sort of pass it on to Oliver to explore. diffusion.
Yes. So yeah, the second part of acceptance, commitment, therapy, training is diffusion. So diffusion's about looking at our thoughts rather than from them. So noticing our thoughts rather than getting caught up or buying into this thought. So similar to what we were just saying then. It's a skill that's primarily used to sort of detach, separate, or get distance from our thoughts and emotions. So imagine the ball. You want to kind of like get some distance away from it in the pool. So letting these thoughts come and go rather than holding on to that thought. And the purpose of diffusion is to enable you to become aware of the actual process of your thinking, so you're better able to reflect objectively and problem solve effectively before taking any action. So I've got a little task for you as well. So what I want you to do is put your hands together as if they were pages of a book, right? And I'm going to do it with you. And I want you to start to imagine that your hands are your thoughts. So, you've mentioned this fear of stepping on stage. So imagine your hands are those thoughts. And now slowly raise your hands to your face until they're covering your eyes and you can only see through the gaps of your fingers. So I'm going to do it as well. Now take a look around and notice how this impacts your view and your connection with your environment. Okay, so how does it feel? What can you see at the moment?
Very little.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is difficult to see through your hands, and in this case, your thoughts. So imagine, your hands are your thoughts, they're right in front of your face. Yeah. What would it be like competing in Overwatch on stage with your hands in front of your face? What would happen?
I think I would struggle just a little bit.
Yeah. No, you definitely would. What Imagine like you had four hands and you actually like could play. You actually have hands on a controller,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But your thoughts were in front of your face like this. Suddenly, what would you miss out on in the game of Overwatch as a tank? What some cues you'd be missing? Yeah.
Cooldowns, positions, teammates, stuff like that. I mean, it'd be relying almost entirely on my sense of sound, and mechanics would go out the window as well. But yeah.
Exactly. So suddenly, if we can start to diffuse and detach from our feelings and just accept that they're there and bring our hands down, suddenly all those cues become visible again. And all those things you've just mentioned, you can now focus on. And I'm not saying, after this session, you're suddenly going to be able to do it. This is going to take, several sessions to be able to master with us. But, we're teaching you the concepts now, and hopefully you come to some realizations. Next time it happens, you might actually think of this, and it might help you in this sense.
Sure.
So yeah.
Sure. So you're saying kind of like my thoughts and my emotions and stuff like that. Like it's not me necessarily. It's just something that I'm currently dealing with, and then I'm not necessarily like that's not necessarily who I am right now. That's just something that I'm dealing with, and so like to detach myself, I need to recognize that I'm not gonna like let that thought define me. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it right.
A thought is a thought in a sense, and
Right.
it's not necessarily the way we interpret something, for example, isn't necessarily the truth. So an example that I like to take, because I've experienced it before, is let's say you walk in a cafe and like everyone sort of looks at you, and you might think, oh my god, I've done something super embarrassing, or like I'm dressed what
Right.
my fit isn't nice or something like that. But actually maybe just people all looked because you just opened the door and it made like that little clingy noise when you go into a cafe, for example.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I potentially interpret as being the situation isn't necessarily the truth, and maybe that's the idea here, is our thoughts aren't necessarily the truth, and the more distance we're allowed to create by releasing our hands from our face a bit more, the better, essentially. The more you
Yeah,
can
that makes
see,
sense.
the more you're able to connect with your environment and, again, your teammates and what's important to you in that given moment. And you can let them sit there, create distance and let them sit there. and that's acceptance, like what we talked about.
Yeah, they don't disappear. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, you decided to focus on something else.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of diffusion and fusion. So to think about moving forwards when you become tilted or you're stepping on stage, reflect on these three questions. Is holding on to this thought or belief helpful? Is doing so causing me suffering? Am I being pushed around by my thoughts? So you don't need to answer them now, but more so have that in the back of your head if ever this arises again. Um, and you may come to a different outcome than what you've had before. So
Okay.
yeah, that's a bit of around ACT. What are your sort of thoughts on this approach? What will you change anything in the future? Did you come to any realizations? Like, what have been your main takeaways from today's session?
I mean, for me personally, trying to think of things as like detaching myself from my thoughts and also just not concerning myself with the thoughts overall, like not worrying too much if they do pop up, I think is a concern. I think that we have maybe this very sexy view of the high level competitive athlete where they're just automatons, and robots, but really nobody's like that, right? It's more about like, okay, everyone has these thoughts. It's kind of like, how do you respond to those thoughts? Some of us respond with fear. Some of us respond with trying to, okay, that thought needs to be processed. We need to let it go, and trying to like rush that process. Um, and maybe the most professional way of handling things is just to not handle it at all and just let it sit, let it diffuse naturally on its own. Um, it almost feels like you guys ever have one of those, like, was it that kid's sand where it's like you push it and it gets really hard, like it's like rock hard, and you just let it go and it gets really soft? It almost feels like that's like the psychological thought is if you just let it go, it'll stay soft and it will drip away. But if you try to like push it out or it's just gonna harden up and push back. Um, but yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah.
You
I
captured
do
it
want
very
to.
well.
Yeah.
Cool.
A really nice analogy there. That's like another one we should add to our
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I do want to stress that this was a very like express introduction to ACT
Sure,
just for the purposes of this video. So,
of course.
and another thing is that acceptance and diffusion are only one part of ACT as a whole,
Sure.
as a concept and as an
Okay.
approach. A really important one, which we do a lot of, is values-based work. So I won't go into the details, but just briefly, it's just the idea of reconnecting with what's important to us in the world, so our values, and using our values, it allows us to act in the way we would like to be in the world, for example. So
Sure.
that's another huge part of ACT is values, and
Sure.
clarifying those. So
Sure.
but yeah,
Sure. So this was framed for a semi-pro player somebody looking to perform. One of the things that I run into frequently is the average 22-year-old with a little bit of ranked anxiety playing Roadhog and Platinum. Um, and so obviously these things are not unique necessarily to professional players by any means. What would be, if you had only a couple of minutes to speak with somebody, something to maybe not to hang your hat on, but for something to them to think about when they're dealing with ranked anxiety or dealing with the pressure of a competitive game? I hate to use the term life hack because it's never like that, but what would be something at least to think about for the average player from maybe this presentation or something else? Because I'm sure you guys get this question occasionally from the casuals, myself included.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think a really nice thing to do. So, like you said, I don't think there's like a off-the-shelf tip that we could
Right.
sort of bring to the table. I don't think sports psychology and psychology as a whole is that. It's much more complex than that. But I think a good thing I would encourage that player to do is really identify and reflect on themselves on what is contributing to that anxiety. Because I think a lot of players, they don't realize sort of like it's sort of the iceberg analogy. Like you have these feelings of anxiety, but maybe try and pin down what do you think might be contributing to that. And there might be things that we don't realize are actually contributing to that. So, for example, a one that I had with a player was his sleep hygiene wasn't great, and that was something he realized was contributing to a lot of these feelings of anxiety because he would wake up in the morning feeling wrecked, and not ready for scrims potentially. So it's really, I think reflecting is really useful, and you can do that by potentially speaking to some friends or to some teammates. I think, like you said today, saying things out loud and trying to make sense of our experiences is really helpful. So that's something I would really encourage
Makes
maybe that
sense.
player to do.
Makes
Um,
sense.
yeah.
I know
So
when ranked anxiety with me was this was something that I dealt with back in like 2017, and for me it was very much a fear of loss
Yeah.
because losing SR felt like such a crippling, like, oh, I'm one step closer, and I hadn't really processed mentally the fact that that's just kind of an inevitable fact, like you have to be willing to lose if you're willing to gain, and that the fear of losing that SR is indirectly. And I remember I actually had a coaching session, and that coaching session was very enlightening, not because necessarily that coach told me anything new, but I kind of was like able to talk things out loud about like why I was so scared of ranked. And then I realized that like how silly those reasons were when I heard them out loud. And it kind of encouraged me. I was still scared next time I queued, but I guess knowing that there was a solution kind of gave me a little bit more confidence. So that makes a lot of sense. Oliver, I think you're going to say something.
yeah, no. To be fair, like I have a similar thing. Like, so I play main game that I play. I do play Overwatch, but the main game I play is FIFA. And like
Mhm.
when we're playing foot champs, which I'm chasing a rank, and the fear of not getting X amount of wins. So, for example, in my case, it'd be 14.
Mhm.
Like all those thoughts start coming into my head, and then sometimes I don't know what it's like. I suppose it's case to case in Overwatch, and like how people handle that rank anxiety. Like some people, for example, after a loss might try and chase the loss and go straight back into a game, and then suddenly we start dropping. And I do the same in foot champs. So sometimes there's actually been I've done workshops on mentally resetting with Overwatch teams. One of the things, simple tips that I could just give to you right now is like things like breathing techniques. I'm sure you've heard it before, but like box breathing.
Right.
But there's actually been a study conducted around a 6-minute walk. So being able to step out of the environment and see something else. So the thing that's tilting you or making you anxious isn't directly in front of your face when you get those feelings, and then returning. So that's something I've been doing. Is sometimes I'll just go downstairs, get a glass of water, speak to my girlfriend,
Right.
and then head back up. Sometimes it's a longer break if I've got the luxury of that, or sometimes it's like we haven't got that long of a break, so
Sure.
maybe a couple of minutes.
Is
And
that
then
kind of
also,
like the diffusion detachment kind of in action?
yeah, it kind of brings you back to reality a little bit. Like you can get so caught up in the game. Sometimes going and talking to someone, yeah, I would actually say, yeah, good connection there in terms of realizing, yeah, it is linked to diffusion.
Yeah.
And then also how you talk to yourself. The self-talk is obviously huge in psychology, and making sure that it's positive self-talk rather than negative self-talk, and not beating yourself up. You deserve the rank that you are, and you'll achieve the rank that you want when you are ready for that rank.
Right.
It's a process. So
That makes a
yeah,
lot of sense. That's actually
What
really, really good advice. I know you said that wasn't. It's hard to like boil down sports psych, but the two things that you guys said is like I feel like that's super, super helpful.
yeah,
So
I,
I
I think
appreciate it.
what Oliver was describing there is like a complete different approach to ACT. So that's more psychological skills training, and that's like another approach that sports psychologists can use with
Okay,
esports players. So although there are some, I think, overlaps, I think they're two different approaches.
makes
And once
sense.
again, this has to align with what the player, their preferences and their needs, and
Right,
that's
right.
something that
So
we
it might work
explore.
for some, might not work for others.
Exactly. For example, ACT today might have not worked for you, but there are lots of other approaches that we can explore together. Yeah, it's not it's a trial and error process, like I said at the start. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, anything else, guys? I know we're running a little over here, but I want to make sure that you guys had. If there was anything that was crucial, important that we didn't get a chance to, I don't mind going over a little bit more.
no, I was really happy with how it went. Also, if people are interested in seeing anything more about the different approaches, I do quite a lot of REBT, which is rational thinking versus irrational thinking.
Hmm.
And that's been really useful for a lot of clients. specifically with anxiety. So that might be something. And then psychological skills and how to actually perform the techniques. But yeah, thanks for inviting us on as well. That's one thing I wanted to say.
Of course.
Really, really was excited to collaborate. I told the players that I've been working with that we were going on the channel, and they're looking forward to seeing us. So
yeah.